So if we can basically try and end that one, just to give me a bit of a breather. Live? Welcome to the last Friday live before the Masters. So it's a suitably wet, horrible, windy day in the UK. Absolutely miserable out there. So hope no one's been out this morning trying to play in that. Doing a bit of an open forum today, so it went really well last time we tried that, and want to give everyone a chance to ask as many questions as possible. So anything you want us to answer or test or do whilst we're on today in the next hour or so, just let us know, and I will do my best to fulfil all your wants equipment-wise. So first, just as a kind of lead in, wanted to just look at a product that's just become distributed in the UK. It is the Proto-concept irons. So these are heads that have been around a little bit now, but mostly most people would be aware of them by Lydia Co playing them. So these are Epon-made products. So Epon or Endo, who do Epon. Those are the four heads. I don't know how visible that is, but trying to hold all four and not drop them all. So they go from a blade to a slight kind of cavity to a mid cavity to a wider cavity. So really kind of top quality forging through Endo, Miura. Endo's probably the biggest forging house generally globally, and Epon being their top line product. They'd be, as I mentioned, the same kind of breadth as the sort of Miuras of this world. And what these heads do, which is quite unique, is every single model has the same loft. So as a set to be able to, one, get a top quality Japanese forging, but two, to be able to blend, mix and match between the different heads, but not affect ball flight, not have to hunt around trying to find a combination of lofts that works. That's really where their USP is. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit a couple with each, and just sort of talk you through what they do. I'll start off with the, it's the blade, with the C01 first. So where they're kind of visually blade, where it's unique is internally, and here there's a titanium. There's a lighter material which spreads the weight out a little bit more, so it gives an internal cavity that's completely invisible. So you can't see it's in there. There's no inkling that there's something inside from a tech point of view. So actually a blade with a little bit of playability. So we'll see. I had a trip down to the South Coast yesterday and back to play down at Sandwich in the Halford, and I'm very stiff, so I'm getting my excuses in early. Although I pity the poor chaps down there today, they are playing some horrific conditions. And that tournament is never called off for bad weather, so they are out in it. So I'm gonna see what this, we'll have a look, and what I'm expecting to see, and what we have seen when testing, is same kind of launch and spin. So it's a very classic shape, a kind of clean leading edge. It's a beautiful classic looking blade. So there's a slightly, because of the titanium inside, there's a slightly clickier note than you might expect from a pure blade, pure sort of single piece forged blade. The moment you add in any materials, you're going to affect the acoustics. So it's not going to feel as sort of buttery soft and sound as soft as the Tor AF, the AF Tor blade that Epon do. But in terms of consistency of ball speed, you can off-center hits, a bit of forgiveness. That's where that titanium gives it that little bit of an edge. So not quite as well hit that second one, but very neutral, mid ball flight. It's definitely got a little bit more of a margin of error. You can actually play completely pure blade. There's no sort of fast face and tech trying to take spin off, but gain a little bit of playability. Other companies have done very small amounts. So Fujimoto sort of drilled in some cavities, but it's still not really quite a blade into one of their heads. So that's one of the things that head produces straight out of the gate, is actually a blade head with a little bit of margin of error. So I'm going to move on to the CO3. So CO3, slightly wider sole. They've cambered the sole, and the sole shape reminds me of quite a lot of the old Mizuno MX series, going back to the old MX-20s, where they had that little bit of a killed leading edge, bit of graduation on the back edge as well. So that from a turf interaction point of view is a good thing. And then into the back, is that angle right? Just see there's that bit of a cavity cut into there. So that again separates the weight from the face. gives a little bit of stability, but what they're not doing is marrying in a different material to the face. So it's not like a lot of the other heads, take a P770 or the MP223, where they're using the face to gain performance. This is purely about, single piece forged with then a little bit of a cavity cut into the back. So a little bit more offset, keeps a very clean top line. So there's a marginal progression in the head itself. So similar kind of sound, but one of the key features here, if James can zoom in on this, if I go between these two, so the data on screen there, this was with the blade, 16.2 launch, 5.4 spin. So the most important thing that we're seeing with these heads is to click to the CO3 there, slightly higher launch, CG's a little bit lower, 17 launch, 5.5 on spin. There's real consistency of spin rate there. So what you're doing when you're blending these sets is gaining a bit of forgiveness. I'm trying to work out whether I should quit when I'm ahead after that swing or not, but it's not changing the ball flight. So actually, in terms of comparisons between the heads, got under that a little bit more, but again, spin very, very consistent. So what these heads aren't built for is just cannoning it. But with the quality of the materials and that little bit of weight graduation, there's really, really impressive consistency on performance off the face. So again, we go to the next model, a little bit wider again. What we've got in the CO5 is a little bit more mass at the bottom, on the back here, and a bit of a sort of slightly kind of more of an undercut kind of cavity into there rather than open back. So mainly a little bit more weight low and back onto this head. So again, what we should gain is a little bit of forgiveness. But in principle, if this all does what it should do, we should see a similar flight again as well. And so there's no change in loft with any of these heads. So definitely you can feel the forgiveness progressing, and where the centre of gravity's progressed a little bit, launches a hair higher, spins up a couple of hundred revs, but that's not the, for example, tech in the head doing it. That's because the loft's staying constant and the centre of gravity is just dropping down a little bit more to pick that flight up a touch more. You can certainly hear a little bit more of a click with each model because of the depth of that cavity, but that's quite out the toe. But again, that flight stability. So from a blending point of view, if someone's looking for a kind of a softer, traditional for forged head with a bit of forgiveness, but wanting something more blade-like in the shorter iron, and as I said, just more forgiveness in the longer irons, but without making it a low spin cannon, stunning head, really, really nice head. So we're going to the CO7, again, wider sole again, and as you'll see for the back, progression on that undercut. So hopefully you'll see from the back. So, and again, this is the last one of these. So there's, again, very, very, really actually quite minimal progression on the offset. So very, very slight progression of the heads through the set. And actually visually heel to toe, they're not noticeably different heel to toe. So between the blade and the CO7, so very, very similar. I don't know if I've angled that right. Very, very similar heel to toe lengths. So you're not looking at a particularly different head at any point during the set either. So you should see again a little more of a higher pitch note and click off the face. A complete slap of a strike. So how did that go? Yeah, that was a rotter. I'll do that one again, do it justice. That was a horrible swing. There we go. So it has the sound of something that's gaining power with each head, but that's just that until the note, the sound rattling around the back and creating a different note. But again, 17 launch, 5.6 on spin. So what we can see with each of these, I've maybe got a bit more on top of that to not fat it like the previous swing. So I've brought the launch angle down with angle of attack, but pitch of spin, very, very, very consistent. So, it's not necessarily a head if you're looking to maximise distance, but if you're looking to keep the flight control and keep a bit of spin in a longer mid-iron, then fantastic. They do stop at 5-iron. There is a driving iron that goes in above that, and that's something, you know, adding a 4-iron in, for example, the 5 and the 7, or even the 3 and the 5, you know, would be something that hopefully they'll do down the line. But currently, each of the models is available 5 through pitch, but pretty unique as an offering to keep that spin so consistent through, and the ball speed progression is consistent through. So something a little bit different. Price-wise, they sit up there, not a million miles off the Miuras, but equally speaking, they're a top quality product. So hope that gives a bit of an insight into those. Really interesting product, and I think something that, again, the fact that it doesn't knuckle spin off, if one's prepared to go that little bit extra and go into the premium forged heads, then they're a great offering. And they're not crazy head heavy as well. They're quite a neutral head weight. So that's something that we often battle against with some of the niche Japanese brands, is they're built for lighter shafts, shorter length, so heavier head weights, which those aren't. So yeah, that's the Proto-concept irons. So any questions yet?
Loads of questions.
Great, thank you very much.
Right, happy Friday everyone. Let's start with Philip Eadsforth. Question about swing weight and extended clubs.
Yep.
I'm 6'5" and play MP20 MMCs with Modus 120 plus 1 inch and mid-size grips. I know Mizuno's use lighter weight heads, but my swing weights are around D5, D6. Is there any shaft that will help get swing weight down?
So there are kind of a couple of points around it. The thing with swing weight is not an absolute measure. So D2 at stand length and D2 at an inch longer mean, from a feel point of view, mean totally different things. So actually D5 at an inch longer than standard isn't that heavy. If you were to take the inch off, you're then down around D0. So the one thing to recognise with swing weight is it's not a number that you can be translated across different shafts. So D5 an inch longer isn't a swing weight that needs alarm bells to ring, potentially. But answer is, there are shafts that will bring the swing weight down, even at the same weight. Did you say it was a Modus 120?
Yeah, Modus 120.
Modus 120. So yeah, that kind of 115 to 120 gram weight. You could go to a KBS, you could go to a dollar taper or a KBS tour, and that will drop the swing weight by a little bit. But by doing that, you're changing. The only way you can do that with the shaft is functionally to move the balance point completely. So it's something that if a shaft works well for you, then it works well because the weight positioning and the distribution suits the way you swing and the way you move. So it's one of those where, yes, there are ways of getting the swing weight down. However, don't be scared by a D5 swing weight at an inch longer than standard. If it feels heavy, it could be total weight of club, because as you extend it, technically there's more shaft than a standard length, so technically you're adding a few grams to the shaft-ish, just because there's more than standard. But it could be dropping total weight or changing balance point that'll help with the timing. So there are kind of few bits around that are relevant to the commenters who are trying to take weight out and make the swing lighter.
Next question was submitted via our Instagram channel. That chap Lordy, hopefully he's watching. What's your take on equal length irons?
So there are pluses and minuses to it. I think if you're someone starting the game, you're only learning one setup position. So there is, straight away you can say, well, that declutters some of the tough bits about learning ball positions and swing planes changing. And so I can certainly see that side being a plus point. There are the other factors are that a 7-iron length pitch wedge. The reason most golfers are better with short irons is because they're shorter. So a 7-iron length pitch wedge or gap wedge or sand wedge, suddenly you're giving yourself a lot more club to have to overcome into time. And then it changes the plane of the moves a little bit. So, someone like Bryson will always claim with a sand wedge, but at 7-iron length, he can make a bigger, wider swing, get more club speed, a bigger arc, hit it higher. But there's a reason why Seve in bunkers was pretty much gripping the shaft, because you could use your hands, you can steepen the plane a bit more, you can manoeuvre the club head a little bit more. So there are absolutely pluses and minuses. I think from a simplifying things down, you can make that argument in the single length setup. From a short game perspective, I think that's where the more traditional progression of lengths absolutely has a very, very strong merit. So what we're tending to do a lot more now is taper off the length progression in the upper end of the iron set, so that, for example, from 7-iron up, you don't go your standard half-inch increments, you go maybe quarter-inch. So you're still losing a club length's worth, half an inch or so at the top end, to try and mitigate the longer sharp being harder work and harder to time. But you're not then losing the benefit of the shorter irons being shorter from a short game control point of view.
Bear with me, slight technical glitch. Okay. Niels, our remote vision mixer, thanks for tuning in and helping us with a few technical glitches. Also on swing weight and shaft weight, but more general, are there any correlations between iron shaft weight and hybrid wood driver shaft properties? Should they match, or are woods an entirely separate area?
So yes, there are some general trends you'd see. So if you're, for example, if you're in a 55-gram driver shaft, you'd often go, for example, kind of 60 to 65 in a fairway, 75 in a hybrid, and then 95, 100 in irons. You should see a progression in weight as the club gets shorter, because then the shorter shaft, shorter club needs a bit more weight to make it the same amount of energy required to swing it. So that's one of the principles there. It varies a bit player to player. There are some players that play the hybrid more like an iron, and therefore a bit more weight in that, bring it close to the irons works well. Other players that swing them more like a wood, and then you're oriented a little close to the wood shaft weights. Sometimes you get a player that will change balance point into the longest clubs, because if they struggle with the club dropping behind them or the face opening, a lighter balance point will help to get that through and square it up. So, but as a principle, you generally see a pattern of balance profile through the club. So if someone needs a tip heavy iron shaft, they're unlikely to need a counterbalance driver shaft, because the way you're moving the club most of the time has a relevance all the way through the set. So in principle, yeah, you generally see a pattern of balance point and a general weight progression of 5 to 10 grams driver to fairway wood, 10 grams fairway to hybrid, and then where the hybrid to irons sit, then that can be a little bit different. But as a general principle, very, very broad generalization, that's kind of roughly where it would sit.
Okay, another question in from Instagram. Thoughts on lofting down a G425 5 wood to play around 16.5 degrees, struggling with a 3 wood?
So, I mean, yeah, if it's depending on which bit you're struggling with. So if it's flight, then absolutely. What it'll do, if the thing to be careful, if you're de-lofting it and you hit a fade, it opens the face up. So one of the things to consider is that what it will do if it's getting it flighted off the ground. If you de-loft your, I'm going to get a wood head just to show this. Only one moment. Let's grab a fairway here. So this is really just to kind of demonstrate what happens with those heads. So if you, I don't know which camera you want to use, we'll stay on this one. If you're de-lofting the head, then you're pulling that leading edge closer to the ground. So if you tend to catch it a little bit clean or don't get to the bottom of the ball, de-lofting can help take that leading edge closer in and get it into the base of the ball. If you're adding loft, you're moving it the other way. So, okay, that's a vast exaggeration of how much it's moving, but in principle, that's one of the things that turning loft down can help with. It could be a case of going to, if it's strike consistency, then the shorter length on the higher loft club can help, potentially. But I guess ultimately it depends what the nature of the struggles are as to whether that could potentially be a benefit or not. But for that reason, if you struggle to get into the bottom of the ball and get the flight up, then 100% that should help.
There's a tremendous number of questions come through. Thank you everyone for sending them through. I don't think we're going to get through them all in this session, but
really appreciate the interactions.
Yeah, I'll pick out some interesting ones. George, how do you price your clubs? Is it just standard RRP, or do you only stock the newest models?
Well, we only stock the clubs that we can get from brands. So, for example, G425 is a bad example because we can still get those for a brief period. But yeah, once a model is superseded, so if you take like TaylorMade, the first generation Stealth, they've run out of stock. We can't get those anymore, so we can't price those. So we only move into the models we can source directly from the head manufacturers. That way warranties are kept. So if there are any issues with products, they can be brought back to us and we can sort that out with the likes of TaylorMade Titleist. In terms of pricing, we're always going to be a little bit more than off the rack, even if we're using stock components, because everything's built in the workshop. So there's a sort of a slight kind of build update, even if we're using stock components, but then the variables come from all the different shafts that effectively are kind of upgrade costs. So some of them, if we can get them via a manufacturer's custom scheme at a better price than we can source them from our suppliers direct, then we'll orient that way and use an OEM upgrade charge. But quite often you might find yourself in an Oban iron shaft, and that's just not in any of those packages. So that then adds on to the cost. So it's very much a case of find the right components, look at someone's budget, because that's going to play a part of it, but and then pull the pricing together from there. So effectively it's a kind of a head element, shaft element, grip element, and then pulled together. I hope that answered that correctly.
Question from Aidan. Can you explain where strike point should be on the sole of a wedge? I tend to have a fat shot in 60 M grind, but can thin a 60 D grind Vokey for close chipping.
Okay, I'm going to get the two heads and just show you how that strike point can vary. The D and the M grinds in the 60s. I'll just get two shafts because it's not going to require full swings. These, he says, just pull two relevant ones. So where the differences in sole shape lie, for those that don't know Vokey grinds off the top of your head, M grind is this one, D grind this one. So the peak here on the D grind is a little bit further forward and a little very, very slightly higher. So that makes it a slightly steeper progression on the front. So technically a little bit more bounce. Whereas the M grind, slightly wider sole, slightly shallower progression, and sort of tapers off a little bit more into that back edge. So how steep that is, and therefore the differentiation between leading edge and the top of that will have an effect, particularly on those sort of chips. What I'm going to do is, I've got the lie board here as well. I'll hopefully be able to demonstrate that strike point using that, if it works the way I want it to, which we'll see. This is particularly for chipping, I think Aidan said, didn't he? Yeah. Close chips. Okay, yeah, so close chips, one of the things that's going to be affected with close chips is, because that's going to be where you're going to want the slightly kind of higher, softer shot out of it, you're likely to deliver the head underneath a little bit more, so that it doesn't come out too hot. So I'll just pop this down. I'll leave it there because we don't. This will just show hopefully a fairly clear mark on the sole. So this one's the M grind. So if I were to essentially playing a little kind of fairly kind of tight chip shot here. So you can see with that on the sole there's a bit of width to that mark, which means that more than just one point has taken the strike. So a little bit of that middle section of the wedge has taken the strike. And that ultimately is where we want that strike point to be. We want it through the middle part, because then you've got a bit of a buffer either side. If I take the D grind, which has got that slightly higher peak, it should show where your issues are. So because that leading edge to the bounce is a bit steeper, to get it to sit flush, you'd have to put the handle forward a little bit more. So what that means is, for a delicate shot, you put the handle forward, it comes out lower, which you clearly don't want to do. So if we're playing that same shot, you can see the strike point there is much more it's on the ridge, it's on that peak. And the problem then is it kicks it. So that then is taking all of the strike, the leading edge can't get to the bottom of the ball, and you're likely to kind of, what we call Barnes-Wallis, it bounce it into the back of the ball and thin it. Or you then get your hands forward, get steeper on it to try and get that into the ball and then chunk it. Whereas the M grind gives you a little bit more to use, and the whole sole shape is taking that contact and skidding it forward. So the more you open that D grind up, the more prominent that ridge becomes. So this is where these sort of grinds are great for someone who, if I get hands forward and hit down on it, then you see there's the mark on the front half, and then it's using that section of the sole. So that's where the bounce and the grind and how you deliver the club is really, really, really key. So getting the right one allows you to play shots, as long as you're not doing anything really kind of wild with the delivery, but will allow you to play the shots naturally. So someone shallower and quieter hands is going to need a shallower sole shape. Someone a little more laggy and steeper on it needs a heavier sole shape. So, but that is why the M will work better for you than the D.
Okay.
Didn't expect it to work that well. Not with my chipping technique anyway.
Crikey, overwhelmed with the questions, thank you. Let's have a look what we got here.
So you're going to stitch me up with a tough one.
I'll try. Tried some Oban CT100 shafts years ago. Love the feel. Unfortunately, price is fairly steep. Any similar, more cost-effective alternatives out there?
So the CT, you're right, the CT Oban steels 100, 115, 125s are a pretty dear shaft, mainly due to manufacturing methods. They're the only shaft sort of really out there that's extruded and pressed through, which is just a dearer process. So tolerance is a little bit tighter, but it does make them dearer. In terms of, they're not a particularly tip-heavy shaft, so one of the closest you're going to get is probably the KBS Tour Light. In the stiff's going to be around the same weight. That's that 100. So the regular's 95, stiff 100, X 105. So in terms of balance point, that, or if you're wanting something a little less counterbalance, then maybe like the nip on the 950 Neo would be pretty close. Those are similar. They're not tip heavy. Both have a little bit of kick in them. Those, from a swinging point of view, are going to be the most similar ones.
Okay, another question from Aidan. Dollar taper or S taper, depending on how you set, 120 stiff irons, struggling with weight of S200s dropping under plane. Any wedge shaft recommendations?
So enjoying the dollar tapers. So S2s are 130 grams, the dollar tapers 120. I mean, into those, the standard KBS Tour wedge or high rev, one of those two is not going to be too far off. The dollar tapers are going to feel a little bit tighter. But if most of the other wedge shafts, you'll get balance more in the tip end. So even the high rev is going to swing a little more tip heavy. So you could potentially go into something like a KBS Tour S Plus at 125, just to up it a little bit, or the 130, depending on how heavy you want it to play. But those will swing the most similarly. And you'll get a bit more feel out the shaft as well.
Aaron Cray, does the sweet spot move when your irons are 4 degrees upright?
Sweet spot doesn't change at all. All you're doing is just changing the plane of the hosel. So technically, some people would say, oh, it moves closer to the shaft. It doesn't, but the CG, the sweet spot on the head doesn't change, but essentially the distance between, if I get one that's got a hosel on it rather than our adapter, if you're, it's got a sticker on it, but the more you move that plane up, then the slightly shorter the length from the top of the hosel to the toe, it's a cross section there. That's really where the sweet spot sits. So if it does, it's fractional. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at such a small amount, it's not worth worrying about because the structure of the head hasn't changed. Just that lie angle has just very, very slightly shifted the distance from the top of the hosel to the toe, and therefore where that kind of plain line of where the balance sits will move very, very slightly in towards the hosel, but an absolute fraction.
Our friendly Norwegian warhound.
If you can adjust yourself to that, you're far better than I am anyway.
Friendly Norwegian warhounds tuning in from Iowa. Any differences in tip weighting versus lead tape? Wants to match feel and swing weight the best I can of my Hogan Fort Worth 15s to some Cleveland 588 forged CBs.
Only once you go over a certain amount, yes, because I get that Cleveland wedge again, wherever I've put it. If you're using tip mass, then the weight's going right in the bottom of the hosel here. So once you go above sort of 6 to 8 grams, then that's going to start to shift the balance that way a little bit. Whereas with lead taping, you can put it right behind the sweet spot. So you can put a certain amount on the hosel. If you think a standard 6-iron head's 260 odd grams, so 4 or 5 grams isn't going to shift that centre of gravity enough. Once you start going 10 grams or more, that's right on the upper limit of what you put in the hosel. So, but technically, yeah, the mass on the back of a head is the best place to put it. It's just that us amateurs don't like club heads looking not pretty with lots of lead tape on the back. That's why the pros don't care. They'll put it on the back, which is the best place for it to be. But we amateurs like them to look nice in the back.
Or just check out Lead Tape Chronicles on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, that's a prime example. You see some absolute, I don't know what you'd call them actually, some great examples of lots of lead. So Billy Horschel last year, I think, ground down the back of his 6-iron to narrow the sole a bit to be able to put a higher CG, so put more lead tape on the top half of his irons. That is a very extreme way of doing it, but that's one of the examples of what can be done.
When will we be testing Fuji Axiom iron shafts? Well,
Literally arrived. Some of them arrived today.
Yeah, not the entire range, but once they're all in and they're all prepped for demo, rest assured we'll do a feature
very soon.
Bear with me. How would you fit Project X into wedges since they get lighter as they get softer? Project X LZ65's 4 to pitch, then what?
That's where the Project X wedge shaft has come in as a principle. I mean, LZs. So you don't really, you wouldn't really want to go lighter into the wedges. Or not, I say really, you wouldn't want to go lighter on the wedges. You'd maybe maintain weight. And something like an LZ, you're going to get more feedback out of it than a standard Project X anyway. So in the standard Project X range, they're quite structurally a hard shaft through that centre bit of the shaft. So from a profile point of view, you're very, very stable through this section. And that does kill a bit of feel in the wedges, but that is why they've engineered the Project X wedge shaft to complement. So if you've got a 6.0 standard Project X, the 6.0 wedge shaft plays softer but maintains weight. So, I mean, something like the LZs, that Project X wedge shaft, trying to match flex and weight, that's probably your best bet, although in the lighter weights, the LZs get a little bit lighter. I don't think of all terms. I mean, at that sort of weight, you could even go into a dynamic gold wedge shaft, potentially, from a weight and feel standpoint. So there are a couple of options there, but probably the Project X wedge shaft would be the first one that's worth trying, I would say.
Let's have a look and see what else we've got.
Good questions, by the way.
A two-part question here from Richard Skinner. I'm struggling with the driver. I'm too steep and cut the ball. Way too much spin. I swing at 100 miles an hour. The ball is going approximately 230 yards. Currently gaming Stealth Plus Original with Ventus Blue Velocore 6 Stiff. Can you make any driver recommendations? I'm working with my pro to shallow me out. That's unfortunately that's an impossible one without knowing any. Basically, downward angle of attack and open face is going to hurt you more than any club can solve at that point. If you're in the Stealth Plus, that's a low spin head. Ventus, that's a low spin shaft. Other than, do they allow you to square the face up? Do they allow you to get the club back out in front and sweep it a bit more? If they're heavy, the Stealth Plus is quite a heavy head. That can exaggerate by, if that gets behind you, then it can get you kind of throwing it over and trapping it, and lighter could help get through and shallow it a bit more. That's pretty much at that point. It sounds like it's more of a technique thing, but from a club point of view, those would be the only questions I would have. Other than loft, but if you're a shallowing angle attack, you're going to need the loft to get the launch once that gets there, so because the spin will drop quite dramatically if you're quite steep onto it. So it's a tough one for me to say for sure, because both components you have there are low spin and good components. So it does depend on exactly where that angle attack and face to path are. Matthew Curtis, maybe a slight crossover from the Instagram question, although it could be the same person. Having difficulties launching a 3-wood, would you suggest looking at a 5-wood head and lofting down?
And that will. And part of that, then the other layer of that is what's your angle of attack and what's the spin. If you're 6 degrees down and you're not launching a 3-wood, that's why. But if you just go higher loft with a steep angle of attack, the spin's going to go through the roof. So that's that's the only, if you're a neutral delivery and it's coming out flat, then loft will help. And there are some heads now that you can get more launch and not throw loads of spin onto it. There are a lot more heads doing forwards now than they used to, but forward or a 5 would. So yeah, that would really be the caveat. If you're neutral delivery and it's coming out flat, use more loft. If you're hitting down it a lot and it's coming out like an extra set with a decent bit of spin already, then loft is going to hurt you. So yeah, that would be the only kind of flip side to that.
Again, everyone watching, if there's anything you want to see tested, any equipment combinations whilst we're live, we're going to probably bring this to a close at 1 o'clock. Just let us know if you want to see anything tested. Next question, Chris C. I'm a mid-handicap and my iron swing speed is around 85 to 90 with a 6-iron, finding my Elevate 95 shaft quite light and flighting it high. What would be a good progression option?
Well, but if you're 85 to 90, that's pretty strong. And it's kind of anything. It's unfortunately, it's a really hard one to answer with any certain, but really anything heavier within reason should work better. If you've got that much speed and you're playing a kind of a sub 100 gram shaft, then either it means it's very much a kind of your kind of real kind of snap, sort of quick acceleration and heavy gets stuck behind you. But if it's going high as well, it sounds like the club just won't stay with you. And it's really, if you can get to somewhere that you can test some different weights and try at 105, 115, 120 and see at what point does it feel hard work, and then drop back down. The simpler it feels, the better the weight's likely to be. So that's always a good way to work. If it feels like you've got to back off it, then they're probably too light. If it feels like you've got to work like hell to get the club through, then they're on the heavy side. And so there's a kind of a base principle that's a good start point. But pretty much anything heavier than that will give you a little bit more to hit against and to time with. So it's just, I couldn't say, right, this is a weight window to work with without having you in the bay, I'm afraid.
Just a question just in from Abstract AV Limited. What would typically happen if your shafts are too heavy or too stiff?
Okay, so stiffness, don't worry about. They'll just feel hard, but in the grand scheme of things, stiffness isn't going to massively affect you. What normally happens is what feels too stiff is normally too heavy. So I'm going to, and this is more on the heavier side of things, wasn't it, James? I think the comparison in terms of what happens if they get too heavy.
Just pull up my questions window again.
I'm going to err to that, so I'm going to make life really hard for myself and go as heavy as we've got.
Yeah, what would typically happen if your shafts are too heavy or stiff?
So, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, stiffness has been massively overrated. If you're going between a R and an S or an S and X, you're looking at 3 to 5% of the bending of the shaft. So there's just not enough to worry about. You'd have to go miles off for flex to have a real bearing, and we've seen that with auto flex and things like that. There's a little bit of spin differential, but in terms of actual left to right dispersion, it's the weight changing that will affect your dispersion, not the stiffness. So this is the shaft I was hitting earlier. This is the one that I use on my own irons. So this is I use a CT115. So what the right way to shaft allows you to do is to stay balanced and to move the club at speed. So, I can stay in frame and in posture and turn, free it up. The club comes with me. So that allows me to generate a bit of speed, not much speed anymore, and keep the club base under control, keep the club in plane. But most importantly, I can stay balanced. If you lose balance, you lose control of the club. Once that club gets out of plane, then the face goes all over the place. So if I go heavy, I mean, this is the X7, so I've really given myself, I've thought, well, there's no point going subtle with it. So on the way back, it might make you, to get the club moving, have to move off it to get it moving away if you go really heavy. So it could bring in a little bit of a lateral move. But the main thing is, once you get to the top, as you change direction, that's the biggest change in force in the swing. So if it's going to break down anywhere, it'll break down there. So what happens is, as I go to fire, it's like chaining it to the wall. Club doesn't come with me. And the two effects of that are, it drops in behind, and then I have to wrap it around to fetch it, or come out of it, because the only way to get the club going that way is for me to go that way. So equal and opposite forces. So what will happen here, if I just make the same, try to make the same move as that last one. So my hip's clear, the club's back there, and it's gone over there. So, and that's just me just trying to move. Club speed's the same, but the club doesn't come with me. And then on course, what you're going to see next is you're going to go, okay, that one's gone right. And once that club gets back to here, there's only one thing that can save it, which is the hands. So then what you normally see would be a complete opposite effect. And off it goes left. But the other bit is my balance, my posture changes. And what happens there is my posture changes, the plane of the shaft and the face angle change. That's where the dispersion goes off. So too heavy, it's going to feel like you come out of it and that the club chases through after you rather than being able just to turn onto it and collect it. So, but the flex is by a mile the less important factor in that.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
Okay, what excited you most about at the PGA show in Florida, and has anything been released that you can show us?
A lot's been released. Shafts are coming out. Shafts are always later in the main. The heads are pretty much all out now. What was exciting? It'll be exciting to get the Axioms in here and see what they actually do. I think anything that's been successful is the Ventus, range with the Velocore, getting that into an iron, seeing that product progression develop, progress is that's always interesting to see that track across. And the exciting, as a grizzled old industry veteran now, it's hard to get excited about much now because the exciting stuff's already happened with drivers that have been so limited now for such a long time that it's hard to see that much progression. Occasionally you get a product, go, oh, wow, I didn't expect that company to do that. I think over the last year or so, the Titleist Woods, the progress they've made, that's probably been one of the most interesting / exciting things because there are lots of players who've wanted to play them because they look great and they're traditional and everything, but they've had to give up performance to do so and they haven't now. I think probably the most exciting thing this year is how much quality, this sounds like a real political answer, but it really isn't, is how much good product there is out there. This year is probably the best year of product I've ever seen, proportionally in terms of how good across the range every brand is, but they all offer slightly different things. So I feel like this year we're at a place where we've got something for everybody this year, rather than previous years, you look at a forgiving iron that comes out flat and you can't fly it up enough. Well, this year we've got the 923 HL, we've got you've got those Proto-concepts, you've got the Stealth HD irons. They've got some product that'll flight it, whereas historically they just weren't there. The differential of deep-faced, shallow-faced fairway woods, hybrids that produce a bit of spin, a little less spin. There's just such a good amount of product this year across the board that I kind of feel like we've got a really good palette of things to work with to find something to work. And that in the exciting, there's some interesting stuff that's not really relevant to mainstream, like the crazy Oban shaft they're doing, the Airburst 1K with just top quality graphites because they just want to. It's an $1,100 shaft. Absolutely irrelevant to most people from what you'd want to spend on a driver, but there's some interesting stuff. But I think we've seen the most exciting days from progression point of view, and now I think I just get excited by a lot of good product to use. Sounds really dull, doesn't it?
Adrian would like to see a clip of Simon. Sorry, would like to see Simon clip a few of the Miura irons that you posted about the other day. I think he probably means the 302s. We haven't got
302s. We haven't got yet. They're launching mid-April, so when they come through, we'll have the demo iron for that. I can hit the KM700s, but they've been out a little bit now. But if you can clarify before we close which one it was.
Yeah, Adrian, let us know which ones you mean. In the meantime,
if it's the 302s, as soon as they come in, we'll definitely post about them.
In the meantime, P.S. Peter, how are you? Good afternoon, guys. Recently, I had my iron shaft changed to Nippon Zella 7. Why does my 9-iron work the best out of the rest?
There can be, you get very, very slight variances in tolerance of balance point within shafts, and it can be that you can have them perfectly match up from a swing weight point of view, and I have the same thing with my irons are upstairs, where I've got little bits of lead tape scattered all over each of them, what look like they're scattered over each of them, where I've just fine-tuned the balance in. So for someone, so Peter, we know really well. Peter's had some nerve damage from a car accident years back, and so his right arm doesn't function in the same way as what one might call kind of fully able-bodied. So his muscle control's not quite there. So he's not able to save something that gets a little bit out of sync. If the club gets out of plane, he can't save it, and so he's massively affected by balance. So for Peter, the little fine tunes on it could be a 0.1, 0.2 of a swing weight point will probably be the difference. And just little tolerances in balance point in the shaft will also make that much difference for you. So it's maybe just a case of popping in and we'll just do our little swing weight check with some lead tape and make sure they're all spot on.
George Harrison. Hi, can you advise regarding too low spin with the driver, i.e. help to increase spin? All the available information is on reducing spin. What are the main figures that affect low spin? My angle of attack is 5 to 7 up.
So that's one thing that influences. If you're hitting up on it that much, then you unless you've got too much loft, you're not going to spin it too much, because that's the more you hit up on it. So maximum spin is going to be created by the biggest differential between launch angle and then that angle of attack. So if you're hitting down at 10 degrees and you're launching it at 20, there's so much of a differential that just cuts underneath and pops it up. If you're hitting absolutely square through the line of flight, you're going to get minimum spin because everything's going directly through that line. There's no rolling up the face, so you get no backspin. There's no grip on it. Essentially, it just comes straight off. So if you're hitting up on it a lot, you will be, unless you're flaring the face open, you're going to be a low spin player relative to launch angle. So if you're 5 up on it, I'm just going to use, I don't know if you said your club speed, but if you're at, say, 100 miles an hour, you're going to need 15 odd degrees of launch angle, 15, 16 maybe, because with that high angle of attack, you're not going to generate the kind of the friction on the face and the backspin. So you're going to create low spin. So you've got to launch it, otherwise it's not staying in the air. So the angle of attack is a massive one, and beyond that it's going to be head style, so you're going to need to get that centre of gravity low and back to make sure it works underneath and keeps the flight up. So for example, something like a Ping 430 Max versus an LS might well maintain a bit of spin for you. You're right, I mean there's been a lot about getting spin off over the years, but yeah, a low forward CG head without enough loft is just going to fall out of the sky. So that, and if you, the only other element of that is if you're closing the face a lot with that. If you're hitting kind of a high slingy draw, the face closure is going to make that spin volatile as well. So playing what feels like a slight trap fade will neutralise the angle of attack a bit more, but keep the face online, and that will leave a bit more spin on as well.
Dan Benson, Carly Booth was putting on a different shaft colour. Start again. Was putting a different colour wrap on her shafts at PG this week. Really cool, but will it impact swing weight?
Actually, very, very slightly. There are two ways you impact swing weight. One is total weight, going up or down of the shaft, and 10 grams is normally about a swing weight point for that. And the other is grip weight or head weight, so the extremity end of it. So they have different effects. So if you're upping the whole weight of the club, swing weight's a static balance, so the whole weight going up won't necessarily make it swing heavier in the head. There's just more weight. If you're changing grip or head weight to influence swing weight, then you're changing that balance point within that club. That then has more of an effect on when that face kind of gets open and closed and out of control. So total weight going, I mean, some of the wraps are minimal in terms of grammage, so a couple of grams, 2-3 grams. So that won't make much difference at all. But if it's, I think if there are some that go up sort of 8 to 10 grams, that'll start to have an effect. But it's the total weight going up, not just club head end. So there are kind of, say, two impacts on swing weight. The head weight being the much more, being the one with much more of an effect.
Andy Corso, I've been hearing that Titleist TSR4 is actually more forgiving than the 3 due to face construction despite the smaller head size. Have you found this?
I wouldn't necessarily say more forgiving. I mean, ball speed wise, they're both good. It's a million times more forgiving than TSI4, which basically Adam Scott was about the only person who could use it. TSR4 was really surprising how forgiving it was. I think maybe that might impact people's perception on forgiveness. I think when you put the weight at the back, then that does make it pretty stable, and for most players that gives you enough spin. Would you say more forgiving? Definitely more forgiving than we expected. More spin stable than TSR3. So if you catch it low on the face or off centre, it doesn't pop up quite as much. TSR3 is quite good for maintaining a bit of spin. So TSR3 was the least difference versus TSI series. TSR2 is better off centre, lower spin. TSR4 is way better off centre, lower spin. TSR3 they kind of kept as a sort of mid-spin head. So I think proportionally it's the biggest change in forgiveness, certainly. Is it more forgiving than 3 on ball speed? No, but on spin, yes.
Cornish Maid, hi guys, I'm going to be getting a set of PXG Sugar Daddy wedges, but I want to be able to open up the lob wedge. Can you advise on the best grind, please? And he did actually make a comment earlier on, so apologies, I didn't answer that straight away. Yeah, best grind for lob shots.
The PXG wedges have a reasonable bit of bounce on, so yeah, I mean the grind with the more relief on the back is always going to be the better one for opening it up, but they are designed for US turfs. It's a bit like the Vokies have got that peak on the bottom edge. We find we do it for UK, assuming you are UK, because we do have some international viewers, which is very kind of them. For UK turf, we tend to pretty much always take that peak off if someone opens it up quite a bit, because our turf's different. 50% of the industry is US, so they design them primarily for US, where there's less root structure, the grass is a bit thicker, the ball sits up a bit more, there's less resistance from the turf, so you need that back edge to stop it digging. I was trying to remember the namings of their grinds, but I think they do a 7 and 10 bounce. 7 bounce is the better one to go for sure. But even then, if you open up a lot, it might need it's sacrilege to say grind one of those, but ultimately you might need to grind it a bit to get it to sit tight.
Any higher balance point driver shafts that aren't overly tip stiff like Hazardous Yellow?
Quite a few. I mean, something like the VA Composites Nemesis is quite low spin, but it's not too harsh. So actually the CQ series from Graphite Design, it's not counterweighted, it's sort of upper mid balance, but that's a really smooth shaft. We've had some great results with that this year already. That's a fabulous shaft. Higher bounce point. Devotion HB is fairly firm. I think the Kyoshi HB, that's softer, that's a little bit of a more responsive tip for a higher bounce shaft. In terms of, if we're thinking, I'm just sort of looking down the line, thinking through, probably a smoother feeling counterbalance would be Nemesis or Kyoshi HB. They're both, in principle, mid to lower end on spin, but they're not going to feel as firm.
Oh, sorry, you wouldn't.
Sorry, yeah.
Currently have Ventus TR Blue 6X in driver. Recommendations for shaft for 3-wood with similar feel. Currently have Diamana BF70TX and struggle with face control and low point.
I mean, you'd look at maybe the TR Red 7, upping the weight a bit but keeping the bounce profile pretty similar. I mean, that would be the most natural one to go to, really. The materials are the same. The butt stiffness is going to be very, very similar. So you're going to still get that bit of a kind of firmer feel under the handle. So the extra material in the TR, if you kind of load it heavily, it's going to feel more stable there. But the red in the fairways like to just give you a little bit more out the tip, a little bit more playability. So that would be the most natural one to go to, although it's not a cheap option.
Let's finish with you hitting some KM 700.
Okay.
If we've got it, have we got it?
Yeah, we got
okay.
it. Yep. Fair. That's a real hardship. Although it could be very embarrassing, depending on how my ball striking is. Right. Let me grab that head. So the KM 700s are these beauties. So one of the latest additions to the Miura line. So with a sort of grind on the toe, so CG position movement to help turf interaction, and technically forgiveness on the on a blade. So Miura-san has been sort of working away at these for quite a number of years, I believe. All right. I'm just going to just double check where the loft is, make sure there aren't any irrelevant spin numbers coming in. We've got some guys in the background doing some work, being very, very, very quiet, which is very kind of them. Yeah, these are very, very pretty blades, quite limited in numbers. I think we have actually got another set coming in shortly. So if anyone's interested in the set, let us know. I think we're pretty certain we've got a set due in. We've got a slight additional one. We've got an extra one available.
And Simon, Richard's asking, what's the pricing on the KM700s per iron, approximately?
They're going to be around...
Shaft and grip dependent?
I think around, I think they're over 400. Not a cheap one. Well, none of the Miuras are, but I think off the top of my head, I think you'd be looking at about, I just think it's a 7, 4, 7. Yeah, probably be looking at pushing 3,000 for a set of 7 clubs. Yeah. So roughly, yeah, so that'd be roughly, does that sound right? 450, 900, 1,800. Yeah, around about the 3,000 mark, maybe even slightly over. So they're a little bit of a squarer toe than some from a visual, but right. Thankfully, I have played golf recently, so. The one thing with the 700s, the Miura heads are a little heavier. So for me, these actually come out slightly heavier on swing weight, so it's that little bit of a catapult left. I don't think anyone, I think realistically the Miuras are not necessarily, there we go, not necessarily the softest feeling heads out there, but I would always say that they're some of the best balanced heads through impact. And by that I mean sometimes the head stays with contact better, rather than you don't feel as much deflection and quite as much vibration through the heads. So they're incredibly stable feeling head. So I play the MB001s. That was hit. So it's interesting. It is a slightly different feel. I would say, the centre of gravity in this head sits a little bit lower, so technically a little bit easier into the bottom of the ball, but relative to your kind of classic high muscle blade, not quite as, one would say, solid feeling. However, flight numbers, really quite nice. And this is a pretty traditional loft. It's a 29 to 30 degree loft on this. So it's what I've found over the years is that I don't necessarily lose much ball speed off a bladed head. Just my delivery, I've always got, well, it was nutted, I've always got quite a lot out of them. So it allows me to keep my vanity and play a pretty looking clubhead at the same time. So, but no, so I mean, very, very solid feeling head. There we go. So one of the things with these heads is just the absolute consistency on spin. Again, a bit like the Proto-concepts. The better quality head, essentially the grain structure, the carbon deposits are more consistent through the head. So you don't get hard and soft spots, you don't get variations in ball speed. You're never going to get a flyer out of a Miura. The only one that flew was because I hit it harder and better. But you're never going to get the spin variation out of them. And that's why the top players play blades, because you haven't got a construction variation in the head. So you're never going to get anything out of it that you just don't expect unless it's a flyer out the rough. So I don't know how interesting it is watching me hitting too many of these, but there we go. Well, I think we ought to end on that one, really, haven't we? Not beating that. So yeah, I mean, these are very similar to what I play from a head point of view. So it's a very familiar feel for me. But they're a beautiful, beautiful head. The 302s have got a wider sole, so they've got a little bit more weight down the bottom, a bit more forgiveness. But there's a very particular feel from a Miura head. I think it's a solid but not harsh. Very, very solid, stable feeling head. And yeah, which is why they're so highly regarded.
Right, well, lunch break is over.
Lunch break.
Just straight back into another fit for you.
Thanks so much for all the questions. I really appreciate the interaction. It's great, and the more questions, the better. Anything you have sent in that we can maybe do some other videos and things on in the meantime, we'll try and do that for you as well.
People chomping at the bit to see you fit yourself for a new driver, so that will come at some stage.
Yeah. I'll need one of the other boys to help out with that. Yeah.
Cool, great. Yeah, guys, thank you for all, guys and girls, thank you for all your questions.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and enjoy the Masters next week.
stay tuned for some more content.
Yeah,
we'll be
hopefully
running
so.
throughout the week.
Great
Some
tournament.
pre-recorded fittings. We may change our Friday live spot to be considered. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for this. Great to have all the questions and hope it was useful. And thanks for tuning. Have a great weekend. Thanks a lot.